so tegus are a species of lizards from South America. They occupy the evolutionary niche that monitors occupy in many other parts of the world. Where monitors did not evolve in South America, tegus did. They're very similar in many ways, but some of the main ways they are not similar are, for one, tegus have autonomy in a sense, which means that they will drop their tails like many other lizards, such as anoles or other things. But monitors do not display the same characteristic. Another way they are similar or different is that tegus have much shorter, thicker necks. They often have a much stouter body posture. Their tongues are often more deeply grooved than a monitor lizard. So a tegus tongue will be more like that, while a monitor's will be more widely flared. They can reach 4 to 5 feet in length and up to 50 pounds or more even, so they're pretty stocky, heavy individuals. See, as hatchlings, they're only a few 5-6 inches in length, if that. I mean, this is pretty much his entire body length. The tail would extend out to there, and that's just a man's finger. So they're pretty small as hatchlings, and they are very fast growing. There are some pretty extreme differences in anatomy between the male and female lizards. Males exhibit a very pronunciated jowl muscle, which is that muscle at the very corner of your jaw. If you squeeze your jaw, you can feel something kind of sticking out. Is that muscle. On a male, as you can see here, it almost looks like a tumor. I mean, it's a huge mass right there, and that is solid muscle. So they have very powerful biting strength. While on a female, it is much less defined. The female is more streamlined and less stocky and generally smaller in size. So they are pretty easy to differentiate between the sexes, unlike a lot of other lizards out there. The males are also more often similar to birds, more brightly colored, more striking patterns, more striking colors. The colors kind of pop. They can live anywhere between 10 to 20 years in captivity, especially if they're well cared for. But they become sexually matured around 3 years of age. So I don't know how to compare that to humans, but they can live for a while. So owning one is definitely it's a commitment, that's for sure. Because they are so stocky and powerful, and also one of the more intelligent reptiles out there, when you are caring for one, you have to make sure that their enclosure is not only able to lock, but if you're able to break their enclosure, so can they. They're incredibly intelligent. I mean, they're like dogs in some instances where you can call their name and they will come to you. You can train them to use a litter box. They're amazingly intelligent as far as reptiles go, at least. They live in many parts of South America, all over the place, savannas, grasslands, rainforests, all over the place. I've even heard of some who will play fetch with you. They're incredibly intelligent animals. They'll eat just about anything you put in front of them. They're omnivores like us. They'll eat meat, insects, plants, vegetables, fruits, everything you can imagine. And when they are hatchlings, you'll want to feed them pretty much every day. And in the wild, when they are hatchlings, they'll eat predominantly insects, some vegetables, some fruits, but mostly insects, as when they're hatchlings. By the time they're 1 year to 2 years old, you'll want to start putting more meat and protein into their diet. But you still want to make sure they have a wide diversity in their diet, so you want to make sure you're still giving them vegetables and fruits and things like that. By the time they're 3 years old, they are sexually mature adults. You'll want to make sure the majority of their diet is lean meats, such as like turkey or chicken, fish, cooked eggs, all kinds of stuff. And when they are in a stage where they prefer eating insects, I mean, they will eat pretty much anything: giant mealworms, earthworms, forgetting something. But also, it depends on their body type. Like, if you notice them starting to get a little bit chunkier, you might want to start feeding them a little less often. While they will really enjoy fruits and prefer them over vegetables, because of the high sugar content of fruits, just like us, they can start to put on weight really quickly if you're not careful. So you want to feed them fruits in moderation. Some fruits to avoid, though, are like tomatoes, which will lizard version of IBS, to put it simply, will not agree with their stomach in most cases. Some of them are fine, some seem to not be. It's hard to say. You'll have to just learn your lizard, essentially. When you are feeding them at least twice a week, you want to make sure you are giving them their food a calcium dusting or some sort of multivitamin addition to their diet. It's just like this. They need that diversity. They need all kinds of different minerals and things in their diet. They aren't straight carnivores. In the wild, they are typically ground dwelling, but that doesn't mean they don't like to climb, because they will climb up into trees to look for bird nests and things such as that, for eggs and chicks that are unattended. But they also, they love to burrow. They spend a lot of their time underground burrowing. It's when they feel safe. It's when they feel protected, when they have something over them. And on top of that, they like to swim as well. They're surprisingly good swimmers despite their size and body, despite the shape of their body, I suppose. They don't look like the Mertens water monitor, for example, which has a very fin-like tail, which is good for moving through the water. Their tail is more rounded, but they're still excellent swimmers. As hatchlings, you can get away with a 20-gallon typical terrarium tank, but that's, when they're 5-6 inches long at most. By the time they're a year or two old, you'll want at least a 40-gallon tank for them. A general rule of thumb is that they should be able to stretch out and turn around in the width of the aquarium and still have room to explore in the lengthwise. By the time they're 3 years old and mature, you're going to want to hire a carpenter or be a carpenter to create a enclosure that is large enough for them, because you're going to want something that is 6 to 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 3 to 4 feet tall. And the height is partly because they like to climb, and also they like to burrow. So you're going to want a deep enough substrate for them to burrow beneath. And the 3 to 4 feet tall, I've actually heard of people being fined in places like Florida because their tegu enclosures weren't tall enough. They only had 3 feet instead of 4 feet, so they got fined, which is kind of obscene. But Florida has a horrible invasive species problem because of the pet trade, and these guys are pretty prominent in Florida as an invasive species, so there's a bit of a problem there, similar to like iguanas and toads and African snails, and the list goes on and on. As I mentioned earlier, they're incredibly strong and incredibly smart. You're going to want an enclosure that can hold them, that can, if they get angry, which they are on the more docile temperaments for the whole, that they can't destroy if they got their hands into it. But you want to make sure it's locked securely. You're going to want to make sure it has venting, which is a bit tricky to get right until you spend some time trying to figure it out, because you're going to want to maintain a humidity level of 80 to 90%, and you have too much venting, too much air is going to be escaping, the humidity isn't going to be staying in place. If you don't have enough venting, it's going to get too humid, and then you risk mold and other problems inside of the enclosure. As far as the substrate for the enclosure, there are a million different recommendations out there. A lot of people recommend just straight layers and layers of newspaper so they can't hide underneath the newspaper. But in my opinion, it's easy for the keeper because then they only have to swap the newspaper out, throw it away, put newspaper in, and they're done for cleaning. Which sounds nice, but also it's not very enriching for the reptile itself. It's not natural. It's not a good way for them to replicate their natural environment. So from the research that I have done, I would recommend a cypress mulch or coconut noir mix, which is just kind of, coconut noir is kind of like, it's basically ground coconuts, and you add a little bit of water to that and it expands. And you mix that with the mulch and it makes a really pretty natural substrate for them to live on. For the substrate, you want to avoid anything that's overly resinous or overly dusty. So things like cedar mulch or pine mulch or things like that that have a strong scent or have a lot of resin in them isn't really good for the reptile, because for the cedar, for example, it has that strong smell that we really like, but it can be really irritating to the animal. As far as the pine, because of all that resin, it starts to stick to them, start to stick to other things in the enclosure, and it's just not that great for them. You also want to make sure you can provide plenty of hides for them in their enclosure, whether that be like a hollowed out piece of a log or something, or even a box you build yourself for them to hide inside of, just so they can have that sense of security and safety. Similar to how cats like to have a box to hide inside of, It's just they feel safe in that confined enclosure. You can keep them outside, and many people do experience success with that, but you have to be in a place like Florida or Louisiana or someplace like that where they naturally have a high humidity, a high natural heat, all that kind of stuff, where it doesn't really get cold. Obviously, it wouldn't work in Asheville. It gets cold here. You'll want to clean you'll want to spot clean the enclosure pretty much every day, just so there aren't feces and urine and things like that lying around. You want to do a complete change of the substrate at least every 2 weeks, so that there aren't, let's say, stray bugs that you have fed them hiding in the enclosure, or feces you've missed, what have you, just lying around. As I mentioned earlier, you'll want a humidity level of 80 to 90%, and a good way to achieve that is by misting the enclosure daily with people use it to scare their cats off counters all the time. It's like a little mist bottle kind of thing. That helps it a lot. A water bottle, of course, you'll need one of those, but ideally, if your enclosure is big enough, you want a tub big enough so they can actually soak themselves in if they feel the urge, so they can get a little bit of swimming in, and being able to soak in the water like that helps with when they're shedding, so they don't get too dry and the shed doesn't stick to them, and it just comes off a lot easier. You can measure the humidity with a hygrometer, which is kind of like a digital thermometer with a wire coming off it and a little tip at the end that you stick in the enclosure to measure the humidity inside the enclosure. Also, you want to make sure you'll want to balance the enclosure. So one side of the enclosure you'll want to have at 75 to 80 degrees around there, while on the other side you want to have the basking spot, or you'll have the UVB light, where it would be like in the wild if they wanted to get out on a rock and soak up some sun rays. You'll want that to be around 100 degrees Fahrenheit as well, because they are used to hotter temperatures. Why the UVB lighting is essential is not only will it provide heat for the reptile, but it provides vitamin D3. And I mentioned earlier where you need to make sure you're dusting their food with calcium or a multivitamin about twice a week or so. Even if they're getting their vitamins, if they aren't getting the vitamin D3 from the light, they won't be able to absorb the vitamins. So it won't actually do them any good. It'll kind of just pass right through their system. As I mentioned earlier, they can be, as far as reptiles go, affectionate. I use that term kind of lightly, but they will come when their name is called if you have spent the time to tame them, essentially. And the easiest way to do that is to begin when they are a hatchling, basically. And so you can start when they're younger, and then they can start to get used to your presence, realize that you aren't a threat to them, even though you're way bigger than them. Because in the wild, you'd be seen as a threat, and that's just stressful. Which is another reason that I recommend people search for captive bought hatchlings to buy as a pet rather than wild caught to have as a pet. Because not only is that more dangerous for you, it's more stressful for the individual reptile as well. But one of the best ways to get them used to your presence to the point where they can tolerate being around you is just hanging out. Which sounds kind of simple, but it's it takes time for them to realize that you're not a threat. And if your enclosure is not big enough to handle an actual basking tank for them, soaking tub for them, being able to take them out of your enclosure, put them in the bathtub or something similar so they can swim around, they can get some exercise, they can get some enrichment. And if you just hang out in the bathroom with them, that will help a lot. You're kind of killing 3 birds with 1 stone there. It's really helpful. And again, letting them soak like that for half hour or so twice a week really helps when they're trying to shed. They need that extra moisture. They need that extra enrichment as well if they're going to be a healthy and happy reptile, which may sound kind of strange, but you can definitely notice a temperament in a healthy, tame, captive raised tegu compared to a healthy wild caught tegu. Because the wild caught will have no sense of what to do around humans at all. Well, if you spent your time with the captive caught or captive raised, captive bred, what have you, they can learn to trust you, listen to you. Even I've seen plenty of videos of them coming up to their owners on their own accord and just wanting to hang out. And there are plenty of arguments out there like, well, yeah, you're a sensitive worm, so they can't warm themselves, so of course they come to you. But then you have to take into account, well, I can put a halter on this guy and take him for a walk outside, and he's happy with it, which is also another great form of enrichment once you've reached that stage, but also them willing to come when their name is called. And like I said, I've seen videos of them where they'll play fetch with their owners, which is wild to see coming from a 50-pound, 5-foot-long reptile. It's kind of weird, but it's awesome at the same time. So yeah, it takes a lot of work, but if you put that work in and you're willing to stick it out, you can have a just about affectionate, cold-blooded companion. Any questions?